This is Michael T. Thank you for being with us this morning. To all our listeners, I would invite you to go to bookpartypodcast.com. That's bookpartypodcast.com. And hit the subscribe tab on top. Then scroll down to the icon of your choice where you can find us on one of your favorite platforms, where you can download and follow us there. And please don't forget to sign up for our newsletter to get the latest information on our upcoming shows. Today, I would like to introduce our guest, Keith Leighton, and his book, Badges, Bad Guys, and Busts. Keith is the Senior Director of Risk Assessment at the Central Ohio Transit Authority, or COTA. In this capacity, Keith is responsible for directing COTA's transit risk assessment programs. Prior to COTA, Keith was a supervisory special agent with the Drug Enforcement Administration for 29 years after graduating from the DEA Academy in Quantico, Virginia, in February of 1992. Keith transferred to the DEA Miami Field Division, where he served for 7 years, then completed tours in Brussels, Belgium, Providence, Rhode Island, Cincinnati, Ohio, and Columbus, Ohio. Keith, why don't you take it from here, fill in some blanks a bit, and tell our listeners about yourself?
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for this time. So it's a very interesting story of how I got to where I am now. I guess I'll go back. When I was a child, my dad was career military. He retired as a colonel in the Air Force after 23 years. We moved all around the world at that point, so I was a true military brat. So I grew up learning about, service to the community, and my dad was worked for the government, obviously, and I saw his devotion to the federal government. So I kind of had a backdrop about military and law enforcement from a very, very young age. So I then proceeded to college. And like a lot of 18-year-olds, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. But I played college football at a small school up in the New England area, and I enjoyed working out. So I took I kind of did a cop out, and I just decided to major in phys ed, only because I played college football and I like to work out. Not really thinking that this was all going to end soon. So I eventually got a 2-year extension on my college life because I went for a master's degree at Springfield College in Springfield, Massachusetts. So I had a couple years more to think about it. But even as those 2 years started dwindling down, I knew I couldn't go to school the rest of my life, and I had to make a decision. And at that time, I was still pursuing the phys ed, health fitness type of background. But I really didn't want to do anything in that field. Like I said, I enjoyed working out, exercising, and the like. I remember one time being home on a break, winter break or spring break or something, and talking to my dad about something I had, what I needed some direction, I guess, as a young, at that time, 22-year-old. And I remember him saying, you've always been interested in law enforcement. And I should have mentioned that, by the way. I always loved cop shows, Miami Vice. I just thought they were very exciting. And I did like law enforcement. I just never really considered it as a career. So he stepped in and he said, you've always enjoyed law enforcement. And, maybe that's a field you'd want to pursue. And he said, take it from me, after 23 years in the Air Force, there's not a better feeling in the world than serving your country. Whether it be in law enforcement capacity or in the military. And he went on to say about the excellent benefits they had, about how every day is different, it's not a desk job, and all that stuff appealed to me. And I kind of was really starting to think about that in our conversation the weeks after that. And we had another conversation, and he goes, have you thought about this career move? And I said, I have. Just a little, confused. Do I want to be a local police officer? Do I want to be a federal investigator? So again, he stepped in, just some fatherly advice, and said, well, if it were up to me, I'd want to do something, like an investigation, like a long-term investigation, undercover stuff, stuff like that. Personally, I wouldn't want to sit on the side of a road just, running radar and speed traps and stopping people for speeding. And that really appealed to me because I was kind of cut from the same cloth as him. And I was like, yeah, I really don't want to just sit there on the side of a highway. So I made a decision. And this is a kind of a funny story because it was pre-internet, pre-cell phone. You're talking 1990, 1991. I was just finishing grad school. I literally walked down to the federal building in Springfield, Massachusetts, and I went to every single federal law enforcement office there was. And I picked up actual paper applications. There was no internet. And I went FBI, DEA, Secret Service. Back then it was called Customs. Now it's called Homeland Security and ICE. Border Patrol, which doesn't even exist anymore. ATF, you name it. There was about 10 of them, to be honest with you. And it was my obsession for the next year. I went back to a typewriter. Yes, a typewriter. And I typed all these applications out. I even remember the code. Back then it was called an SF-171, just one of the millions of government forms that I soon became very familiar with. And I just started sending them off through the mail, snail mail. And I was kind of on this craze. It took me about a year. And I was taking one day a physical, a PT test, a physical test, push-ups, sit-ups, running for one agency. And then the next day I was doing a lie detector for someone else. And then the third day I was doing a oral interview. It was just round the clock, crazy. And all these were out of the Boston area. I was in Springfield, Mass., which is about an hour and a half. So I had to make that drive constantly. But I was obsessed at this point. I had found this new kind of life and I was really into it. And then gradually, as the process went on, one by one, they either dropped me because I just wasn't qualified. Perfect example, the FBI dropped me almost immediately. The FBI is very hard to get into. You either need a law degree or to be a CPA or to have an exotic language like Farsi or something like that to be in the FBI, and I didn't have any of that. So I was disqualified almost immediately, which I understood. I just didn't have the qualifications. And then maybe I remember the U.S. Marshals, another one I applied to, they just weren't hiring. It just happens. They were in a hiring freeze. And then some of the others actually wanted me, but I didn't want them. I just had to make a command decision at that point. I remember the Border Patrol offered me a job. I would have to relocate down to the southwest border and patrol the border. And I had to learn Spanish. And, I had never been in that part of the country in my life. I didn't know anyone down there. And then the starting salary was something like $18,000 or $15,000. So I didn't take that. And then I kind of got a little discouraged as this year kind of wrapped up and I had done all my stuff. Interview process was kind of complete. There was only two left. It was the DEA and the Secret Service. And then just one of those, all the stars were lined up. One day the phone rang. I was at another job. It was at my desk. I just picked up the phone and it was DEA headquarters. Offered me a job. I was shocked. I took it there on the spot. I couldn't have been happier. I was off and running. And that's how my career started. And I had to wrap things up, get packed up. And I had to spend the next 14 weeks in Quantico, Virginia for DEA training. And that was at the FBI Academy, actually. We did not have our own academy. Now we do, but we trained at the FBI Academy. So that's kind of how it all got started.
Oh, great. Yeah, I remember those days when pre-cell phone, pre-computer. I remember in 1982 when I was in Germany, if I wanted to call home, I had to get a couple handfuls of Deutschmark coins and go to a payphone and keep pumping them in to talk to my mom, Yes. Yeah, I remember that. Okay. With your book, are you a self-publishing author, or did you go through an agency, or how did you do this? Did you write it yourself? Did you use collaboration with ghostwriters and help other ways, editors and things like that? How did you do it?
So it's an interesting story. I was getting near the end of my career at the DEA. I did 29 years. I kind of wanted to cut it off at 30. I was starting to get burned out. It's a tough career for that long. Obviously, I kind of wanted to do something else with my life. 29, 30 years is a long time. And at the same time, the pandemic hit, and we were all kind of just sent home. No more operations. Judges didn't want prisoners coming in for, initial appearances. Prisons didn't want, you to arrest people and have to bring them in for processing, fingerprints and mugshots. And we were kind of just told to go home and wait this out. If you remember at the time, this was supposed to be over in 4 weeks, 6 weeks, not 2 years. So we thought we were just going to be home for a while. Also, all these thoughts started coming to me. So I had some time off sitting home during the pandemic. All our operations were shut down. And my whole career, there was two things that kind of drove me towards the book. First of all, I spent my first 7 years in Miami, and it was right after the 80s and the cocaine cowboys and the Medellin cartel, Pablo Escobar and those people. So I had some crazy times. I wasn't there in the 80s. I started there in 92, but it was still crazy enough. And I had quite a few stories. And once I would tell them at a bar, at a party, having coffee, people would immediately say, "Oh my God, you have to write a book. These stories are unbelievable." So that was always in the back of my head. The other thing is, my kids were very, very young when I was in Miami, and we were like, Miami with DEA. We were pretty much working around the clock, and I didn't see a lot of my kids. And they didn't know what I was doing. And at this point, when the pandemic hit, they were in their 20s, much older. And I thought this might be a good time to kind of tell them where your dad was all those years. So it was kind of a combination of people telling me I should write a book, my children wanting to know kind of what I did all those years, having some free time, the pandemic, and we were kind of shut down. And I also wanted to do it. The last reason was for a tribute to the fallen men and women in law enforcement. I have seen death. I've been in situations where I've known agents that have died. So I want to do it as a tribute to them as well. And also, I guess the final thing is I want to give the public kind of an inside glance of what we do on a day-to-day basis. I mean,
right, I understand that. What I'm asking, though, is when you write the book, did you use anybody from the outside, like editors and formatters and anything? You format the book yourself?
So what I did is, luckily, I knew a couple agents that had written books themselves. So I started picking their brains. And I wrote it completely on my own. And I really started using an old 8th grade English outline on paper. And I kind of made my outline of my book. And then I just started typing, really. And it was hard at times. Writer's block is a real thing. And I would try to tell myself, 15 minutes, Keith, give me 15 minutes today. And sometimes it was 14 minutes and 59 seconds and I was done. Other times the ideas just flowed and it was 2 hours, 3 hours. So yes, I wrote it beginning to end. Luckily, because I had some assistance from other DEA agents that had written books, I was turned on to who they used as an editor. I was turned on as to who they used as a publisher. And my wife was a huge help, to be honest with you. She edited a bunch of times for me because you always want a second or a third person to hear it. She was told one time it's best to read it out loud. So she did that for me. So she's actually listed in the credits as a co-editor. So yes, self-published, wrote it all myself just from an outline. And now it's on Amazon.com. So yes,
Okay, so you upload it to KDP?
Yes, it's on KDP.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So in the writing of this book, take us to the point that was your worst author moment.
A few things. One of them was remembering details. I should have, and I kicked myself when I was writing this, taken little notes every day for 29 years, a couple sentences here or there. That would have been, a really, I really would have welcomed that help. But I didn't. So, you're talking 29 years. I was about 53 years old when I started this book, remembering details. I was on the phone constantly with some of my old DEA buddies that I worked these cases with, saying like, I remember this part, but what happened then? Just the details. And it was kind of frustrating. Thank God Most of the agents I worked with were still alive, and I was in touch with them and just picking their brains. So just remembering the details. And then I tried to be really, really careful on a few things. I didn't use anyone's name in the book unless they gave me permission. So, and if they gave me permission, I got written consent. So that was very meticulous. I had to protect people if they didn't want to, have their names used, and I followed up very sincerely. Those people that I didn't want their names used, or if I had arrested a guy many years ago, I never used their real names, because the last thing I want to do was have a guy that I put in jail 30 years ago, and maybe he did his 5 or 10 years, and he's out and about, and he has a new life. I didn't want to use his real name and just, ruin his life. So there's not a single bad guy's name in my book that is real. So I had to come up with all these aliases, which was at one point I was confused. Like I was trying to keep these names straight. Like, who is this guy? I made this. So I actually had to start writing these names down. Like, this alias is for this guy. So, and the last thing that was frustrating for me is I wasn't sure. By this time, I had started writing it when I was still employed with the DEA, and eventually I retired. I got this other job that you explained in the beginning, and I finished the book, excuse me, as a private citizen. I had retired. I wasn't sure if I needed DEA's concurrence or approval to release this book. So I called them, and they said, you don't have to. You're a private citizen, but we would like you to. And I remember talking to one of those DEA buddies I mentioned about who had written one of their own books. They said, Keith, don't do that. They're going to rewrite your book. It won't be your voice anymore. So that was kind of tough, that I was kind of not abiding by my old agency. But I was very, very careful. Anytime we talked about a specific operation or a specific technique or equipment, I was very generic. I wasn't going to put anyone's in harm's way that was still working in the field. I was really careful. So I did not run it by DEA headquarters. I wrote it on my own. But again, I was very, very careful. So, just the details and the, making sure people were safe. Sometimes the writer's block, just stuff like that were some of the pitfalls.
Yeah. Okay. Take us, this is what I call the epiphany moment. Take us to the point in time of an incredible, let's say, light bulb went off in the head, a moment, a story that would go, wow, I got it now. Oh, there it is. I got to run and grab a pen and write it down. The wow moment.
It was probably the last case I did, which I had just couldn't write about it at the time. It was too fresh. It was the final case I did before I retired, and I left it out as long as possible until all adjudication had been completed, people had been sentenced. If there are any type of issues still, litigation. And then I got the green light from the prosecutor to go ahead and add that story. And that was a phenomenal story. It's like the last chapter of my book. It's how I was involved with the FBI in dismantling the Short North Posse here in Columbus, Ohio. It was a fascinating case because for many years, and people in law enforcement will understand this, there was a lot of friction at the time when I was going through the ranks between the FBI and the DEA. There wasn't a lot of intelligence sharing. There was a lot of protecting their territory and informants. And then all of a sudden, I got this opportunity. There was this really bad gang case, street gang case here in Columbus that the FBI needed to tackle. And they figured the only way they could do it was with a wiretap. And throughout my career, I was a wiretap expert. I actually traveled around the country at one point in my career, teaching other agents how to do wiretaps. I was on this elite team that just traveled around teaching. At the time, I was the best wiretap man in the business. I won numerous awards because of my wiretap. Anyways, I went over on a 3-year stint to the FBI to do this wiretap investigation. It was fascinating. I had never worked with the FBI before. I actually got FBI credentials, so I'm DEA credentials, FBI credentials. This was pretty cool. And I worked side by side with the FBI in tackling this this gang unit. Anyways, getting back to your original question, I want to include that so bad, but because it was at the end of my career, I had to wait till, like I said, all the litigation, appeals, everything else was over. And when that was done and I got the green light, that was my aha moment. Like, this is a great finish to this book, and I'm able to do it. And I can just finally wrap this up. I was kind of waiting for that green light.
Great. What is this we're talking about today? What is the one thing that you're the most fired up about, something that you're just excited about right now, today?
Couple things. First of all, I'm a published author. I just think that's really a cool thing. There's not a lot of people that say they're a published author. I enjoy that kind of every day. I still sell a book here and there. I mean, it's been out on the market for about 3 years. I sold one, not today, so I can't say I'm excited, but I sold one yesterday. I saw it on KDP. That always excites me. Somebody bought my book. And being on this radio show with you, to be honest with you, I've never been interviewed before, so this is making my day. It's awesome. I've never been interviewed before about this, so this is the highlight of my day, believe it or not.
Yeah, I've if you think back about some of these movies where somebody's all snooty and they say, "But I'm published." Now you can say, "Hey, I'm published, man."
Right.
Anyway.
Right.
Okay. Again, this is Michael T., and I thank you for being with us this morning. To all our listeners, I would invite you to go to the bookpartypodcast.com. That's bookpartypodcast.com, and hit that subscribe tab on top. Scroll down to the icon of your choice where you can find us on one of your favorite platforms. There you can download and follow us. And please don't forget to sign up for our newsletter and get the latest information on our upcoming shows. Okay, this is the lightning round. I've got 4 pointed, quick questions for 4 pointed, quick answers. Okay?
Sure.
This is your first book. So what was holding you back from becoming an author in the first place?
Really just time, to be honest with you. I mean, like I said, I was in Miami for 7 years. You kind of work around the clock there. It's a very busy job. And I had, I had a family. It was just the time and, the wherewithal just to sit down, be disciplined, and do it. I had all that at the time, except the time and the pandemic. One of the silver linings, I know there's not a lot about the pandemic, was it kind of gave me time just to sit down and write.
So for you, it was time. Okay. While you were writing, because you said a lot of your other friends or agents have written before, what was the best advice you had ever received?
From the individual that I spoke to about going through DEA headquarters, use your own voice. They want to hear your stories with the way you tell them. And I'm so glad he told me that, and I didn't get anyone else's permission, because now there have been people that read the book and that know me, and they said, the most amazing part about this book, Keith, was that it was like talking to you. I could hear you telling these stories. So it was my voice, which I'm very proud of.
Great. Share one of your personal habits that contributes to your success.
I feel I'm a very organized person. I have my calendar on my phone. I have an actual physical calendar where I write all of my appointments down, and I have stickies everywhere, Post-its. I'm just a very organized person. I can keep a lot of my thoughts going because they're all written down somewhere, notes in my phone, and the like.
Okay. Pick one internet resource that you use for your writing that you can share with our listeners.
Because it was a memoir and I lived it, I didn't really need to go back and do much research because it was my life. Like I said, the few things I had forgotten, details, I was able to get from my colleagues that I worked with. There is a chapter in the book. I don't want to give everything away. because I'd like you to buy it. It's about the Manuel Noriega trial. There was some, because I was a brand new agent and I came into the DEA at the time he was getting sentenced. I wasn't sure how the invasion of Panama went with the Marine Corps. So I went back to a lot of military sites. I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly which ones. I wanted to know why we invaded Panama and dethroned Manuel Noriega. I wasn't an agent at that point. I was an agent when he got sentenced. It was in Miami. So a lot of military sites, political sites, like why all of a sudden was Manuel Noriega a friend of the U.S. at one point, and then we actually invade his country and dethrone him at another point. So just some history and political websites. I just can't remember exactly the exact names.
Fair enough. Okay, now we're entering what we call the grand finale. And in the grand finale, what we'd like to do is have you be able to tell our listeners maybe how they can connect with you. You've already said your book's on Amazon, right?
Yes, it is.
Fair enough. We can find that. Because on our intro, obviously they can find that connection. So what I want you to do here is take your time a little bit and just tell about your book.
So again, it's my memoir. We've already been over that. I think you'll enjoy it. It's authentic. It's real. I wrote it. You can see pictures of me in the book. I think it's very interesting. I think it shows, people grow up watching shows like Miami Vice, which I did too, and I enjoyed it. But it's so unrealistic. Every single crime was solved in the hour that the show was on, and they drove around in, Testarossas and lived on boats. And it's just not like that. I wanted to give people a real inside view as much as I could. Again, I had to be careful of revealing too much. The fascinating thing that a lot of people find about my book is that the drug trade and drug law enforcement takes place all around us. We used to do our undercover deals where we could mix in with the population. It was never one-on-one in the middle of the night in a dark alley like you see on TV. It was like in a Walmart parking lot or a Home Depot parking lot. We blend in. So I find it most people find it fascinating when they read my book that, wow, this is like all around us. And I said it is. And we always made sure we protected the public and we're very safe when we're out there. But that's one of the things I find fascinating about my book, and people have told me, is that it gives this glimpse of an everyday DEA agent that you can not really find anywhere else. So I think you'll find it humorous. There's some funny stories in there. I try to capture some of the humor of their job. There's some tragedy. It kind of hits all emotions, to be honest with you. It's real. Like I said, there's funny moments, there's tragic moments. There's some frustrating moments. You can see where the government is just banging heads against one another, like I told you about FBI versus DEA and other stuff like that. So I think it kind of hits all the emotions in one single book.
Good.
Yeah. I think
and it's coming from your own personal experience and your own point of view.
Exactly. Yes.
That's fantastic. Okay. Again, this is Michael T., and I thank you for being with us this morning. To all our listeners, I would invite you to go to bookpartypodcast.com. That's bookpartypodcast.com. Hit that subscribe tab on the top. Scroll down to the icon of your choice, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, or Audacity, and download and follow us there. And please don't forget to sign up for our newsletter and get the latest information on our upcoming shows. Book Party Podcast is owned and powered by MTM Legacy Publishing, LLC of Wyoming. Michael T. is signing off.